At 7:10 on the morning of June 4, 1942, First Lieutenant James Muri pushed his B-26 Marauder down to just 200 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Ahead of him, sunlight flashed off the waves. Behind him, 30 Japanese Zero fighters peeled out of the sky, diving from 12,000 feet straight toward his aircraft. Muri was 23 years old. It was his first combat mission, and he had received no training for what he was about to do. 150 miles northwest of Midway Island, the Imperial Japanese Navy's 1st Carrier Strike Force steamed in formation. 4 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu, screened by destroyers, cruisers, and battleships. Vice Admiral Nagumo commanded the most powerful naval force ever assembled in the Pacific. Muri's aircraft was never meant for this mission. The Martin B-26 Marauder was fast, heavily armed, and brutally unforgiving. Pilots called it the Widowmaker. Landing speed, 150 miles per hour. Wing loading, extreme. Small wings, massive engines, razor-thin margins. It punished mistakes instantly. Early in the war, accident rates were so high that crews refused to fly it. Nobody at Wright Field had imagined hanging a 2,000-pound torpedo beneath a Marauder's belly. Nobody trained B-26 crews to skim wavetops while attacking aircraft carriers. Nobody briefed Muri's squadron on torpedo attack tactics before. They scrambled from Midway's Coral Runway at dawn. 4 B-26 launched, 4 crews, 0 combat experience, 90 minutes of torpedo training. Combined, Muri flew Susie-Q, named after his wife Alice's nickname. His crew of 7 climbed aboard knowing the numbers. Earlier that morning, Navy torpedo squadrons had lost 45 out of 51 aircraft attacking the same fleet. Most crews died in under 8 minutes. They found Nagumo's carriers at 700, 4 massive flat-tops cut through the ocean in perfect formation. These were the ships that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Ships that had sunk more Allied tonnage than any force in history. 30 Japanese fighters rose to intercept 4 American bombers. The math was merciless. As Zero tracers ripped past the cockpit, Muri pushed lower, 150 feet, then 100, then 50. Propellers threw salt spray across the windshield. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The sky filled with steel. Muri held his course. Akagi's guns opened first. Black bursts of 25mm fire exploded ahead of the formation. Heavier shells from the destroyer screen joined in. Zero fighters attacked from above and behind, their cannons tearing into aluminum skin. Muri didn't climb. He went lower. At 50 feet, then 40, then 30, the Marauder skimmed the waves. The aircraft shook violently as shells punched through the fuselage. Smoke poured into the radio compartment. Something exploded behind the cockpit. The navigator called the range. 3,000 yards, 2,000, 1,000. At 800 yards, Muri released the torpedo. 2,000 pounds dropped away, and the B-26 leapt upward. Muri banked right, directly into the heart of the carrier's fire. Every gun on Akagi locked onto Susie-Q. In that instant, Muri made the only decision left. He turned toward the carrier. The Marauder screamed forward at nearly 280 miles per hour, dropping lower with every second. 20 feet, 15, 10. Akagi's flight deck rose ahead like a steel cliff. Japanese gunners stared straight into the oncoming bomber. Some dove flat, others kept firing. Muri held steady. At less than 6 feet above the water, Susie-Q cleared the bow. For 3 seconds, the American bomber flew the length of Akagi's flight deck at masthead height. Sailors threw themselves flat. Anti-aircraft crews abandoned their guns. Prop wash knocked men off their feet. Parked Zero fighters rocked on their landing gear. Vice Admiral Nagumo stood on the bridge. An American bomber passed 20 feet in front of him. The noise shattered windows. Staff officers hit the deck. Nagumo did not move. The bombardier fired down the length of the deck. Machine gun rounds tore through aircraft and gun crews. Fires flared. Men fell. Then Susie-Q cleared the stern and vanished into smoke. Behind Muri, Japanese gunners could not fire without hitting their own flagship. The bomber escaped the killing zone, alive, but barely. Muri kept the Marauder pressed low, no more than 40 feet above the Pacific. At that altitude, the ocean became a blur of dark blue and white spray. Every vibration felt wrong. Every gauge told a story he didn't want to read. The right engine was dying by inches. Oil pressure dropped into the red and stayed there. Temperature climbed past safe limits and kept climbing. Inside the Pratt & Whitney, metal components were grinding together without lubrication. heat, welding parts that were never meant to touch. Muri knew the sound. Every pilot did. When that engine seized, it would do so instantly, without warning. He eased power back, trying to delay the inevitable. Behind them, the Japanese Zero fighters swarmed, closing and peeling away, probing for weakness. Gogoi tried to bring the dorsal turret around again, but it wouldn't move. The mechanism had jammed from shrapnel damage. Ashley couldn't reach the tail gun, blood soaked through his flight suit. Johnson's nose gun had gone silent. Empty. Susie-Q was defenseless. Then, without explanation, the Zeros broke off. Muri watched them climb away and disappear toward the horizon. For several seconds, nobody spoke. No one understood why 30 fighters would abandon a crippled bomber limping home at wavetop height. They didn't know that American dive bombers were already descending on Nagumo's fleet. Muri focused forward again. There was no room for relief. The ocean ahead was empty. Midway was still more than 100 miles away. One engine was failing, the other was overworked. Hydraulics were gone. Radios were dead. The aircraft was flying on borrowed seconds. Captain Collins' B-26 appeared off Muri's left wing. It looked worse than Susie-Q. Smoke streamed from one engine. The tail section was shredded, barely holding together. Both aircraft flew in silence, close enough to see each other's damage, far enough apart to avoid collision if one suddenly fell. They held formation for 20 minutes. Then Collins began to fall behind. Muri knew the rule. Every pilot did. You don't slow down for a dying aircraft if it means killing your own crew. Collins knew it too. He raised a hand in farewell. Muri returned the gesture. Two bombers separated over open ocean, each flying alone. 50 miles from Midway, the right engine on Susie-Q finally gave up. The propeller shuddered violently, then froze. Muri feathered it instantly, reducing drag, but the effect was immediate. Airspeed bled off. Altitude dropped. 40 feet became 30. 30 became 20. Now the Marauder was flying on one engine, overloaded, damaged, and leaking fuel. The island appeared as a dark line on the horizon. Muri pushed the remaining engine harder. Temperature spiked. The needle crossed the red line and kept moving. He ignored it. If the engine failed now, they would ditch in the ocean and be torn apart by waves before rescue arrived, if rescue arrived at all. At 20 miles out, more aircraft appeared ahead. Japanese strike planes returning from their attack on Midway. Muri's stomach tightened. Several fighters peeled away and turned toward Susie-Q. Muri shoved the throttle forward. The left engine screamed in protest. The aircraft accelerated to nearly 280 miles per hour, on one engine and sheer momentum. The Japanese fighters tried to close but couldn't. They were low on fuel. They had already been airborne for hours. One by one, they gave up. 10 miles out, the right engine's propeller windmilled uselessly. Muri feathered it again, fighting drag. Altitude dropped to 15 feet. The Marauder was barely flying now, skipping along on air pressure and willpower. Midway's runway came into view, a thin strip of crushed coral surrounded by wreckage, smoke, and fire. Muri prepared for a crash. Hydraulics were gone. Landing gear would have to be lowered manually. The co-pilot left his seat and began cranking the emergency system by hand. The mechanism resisted. Something was bent. Something was jammed. He kept cranking. Sweat poured down his face. His hand slipped on the handle. He wiped blood onto his flight suit and kept going. Then another problem surfaced. The left main tire was gone. Shot away over Akagi's deck. Landing on bare metal meant the aircraft would pull violently left the instant it touched down. Combined with no hydraulics and one engine, it was a recipe for disaster. Muri held altitude at 20 feet, riding the edge of a stall. The remaining engine howled at full power. The temperature needle was buried. 3 miles out, the main gear locked down. The nose wheel refused to move. The co-pilot cranked harder. The handle wouldn't budge. Something was seized. Landing without a nose wheel meant the aircraft would pitch forward, propellers striking the runway, possibly cartwheeling. 2 miles out, Muri kept flying. 1 mile out, the nose wheel dropped suddenly and locked. All 3 wheels were down. One was bare metal, but they were down. Muri crossed the beach at 15 feet and nearly 200 miles per hour. Too fast, too late to abort. He cut power. The Marauder dropped like a stone. Susie-Q slammed onto the runway at 135 miles per hour. The right main gear touched first. Then the left rim struck coral and exploded in sparks. The aircraft veered hard left. Muri stood on the rudder. The nose wheel slammed down. propellers shattered against the runway. Throwing metal fragments in every direction, the aircraft skidded, slowed, and finally, miraculously, stopped. 7 men were alive, and only then did Muri allow himself to breathe. Ground crews counted the damage. 506 bullet holes. The aircraft would never fly again. 2 B-26s had returned. 2 were lost. 14 men were dead. No torpedo hits were scored. By every tactical measure, the mission had failed. But aboard Akagi, Vice Admiral Nagumo had seen something that morning he could not ignore. American aircraft were attacking Midway in waves. They were aggressive, coordinated, persistent. 5 minutes after Susie-Q passed his bridge, Nagumo ordered his aircraft rearmed with bombs to destroy Midway. Then a scout plane reported American carriers. Nagumo reversed the order. Torpedoes were stacked beside bombs beside fuel lines. At 10:20 a.m., American dive bombers arrived. Within 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were mortally wounded. The chaos created by earlier attacks, by torpedo bombers, by B-17s, by 4 Army B-26s had shaped the battlefield. Tactical failure, strategic catastrophe for Japan. James Muri did not learn any of this on June 4th. He sat on Midway's coral runway, hands shaking, staring at an aircraft that looked impossible to land, let alone fly. Ground crews counted 506 bullet holes. Systems were destroyed. Engines were internally ruined. Susie-Q would never leave the ground again. 2 days later, a bulldozer pushed the wreck into the Pacific. The ocean swallowed it. Muri wrote his after-action report with trembling hands. He stated plainly that the torpedo missed. The mission failed. 2 aircraft were lost. 14 men were killed. He believed that until the day he died, the military did not. 3 months later, Muri and his entire crew received the Distinguished Service Cross, not for results, but for extraordinary heroism under impossible conditions. The citation did not mention the torpedo. It didn't need to. Muri never flew another combat mission. He was sent to train pilots, teaching them how to survive the Widowmaker, how to fly on one engine, how to land without hydraulics, how to keep control when everything went wrong at once. He saved lives quietly for the rest of the war. All 7 men of Susie-Q survived World War II. In a conflict that killed over 400,000 Americans, that alone mattered. Muri remained in the Air Force for 24 years. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. He returned to Montana. He lived quietly. He never sought attention. He rarely spoke about Midway. In 2003, at age 84, he received the Jimmy Doolittle Award. He thanked his crew. He mentioned the 14 men who never returned. Then he sat down. James Muri died in 2013 at age 94. The metal nameplate, Susie-Q, survived. It hangs today in the National Museum of the United States Air Force. The aircraft rests underwater off Midway, coral growing through its wings. Historians still debate causation, but one fact remains uncontested. At Iro 7110, on June 4, 1942, Vice Admiral Nagumo watched an American bomber fly down his carrier's deck. That moment changed how he thought, and how he thought changed history. Wars are not won by single missions. They are won by moments that accumulate, by fear, uncertainty, pressure, and human judgment under stress. James Muri never knew that his 3 seconds over Akagi mattered. History does. And now, so do you.